Now it's time to animate the illustration that I did on my previous storytime video. But first, I want to say thank you so much for your warm, kind, and encouraging words there, as well as your inspirational stories and thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for sharing them. My YouTube journey has just begun, and I look forward to building this community with you guys. But first things first, I want to officially introduce you guys to my constant best friend and companion and fur baby, LATTE. I met her 8 years ago through my mom's insistence and encouragement to adopt a fur baby. And lo and behold, she's the one who watches over me as well as comforts me during tough times for them. And of course, the other LATTE that'll help keep me up as I do this animation. This process will be divided into two parts. The first part will focus on background animation, and the second part will be the character animation. This is the final rendered illustration from the storytime sketch and line art that I did, and as you can see, I've already flattened the layers and the parts are also rendered separately. And I'll be importing them through drag and drop because that's actually possible if you're using Procreate to draw the illustration from. There's actually a faster way to do this, but this is just my preferred method because I got used to it using Calipeg as well. And I do prefer the control that I have over the groupings as well as the organization of the layers. So this is more of my method, but you can explore the other method as well. First thing I'm animating is this coffee cup, and I'm starting off with a filter keyframe animation using opacity just so that it'll fade in. After this, I'll be adding a move and scale keyframe, and I'll be utilizing the scale feature there to add to the popping effect of the coffee cup. As you can see here, I'm actually adding a bit of a bounce just so that there's a bit more dynamic to the movement. With move and scale, remember that you can also expand so that you can see each type of keyframe so that the other keyframes don't have to be affected. So for this one, as you can see, I'm only adding keyframes to rotate and scale. Now I'm going to be animating the swirl, and for this one, I'm trying out lens blur. By the way, I didn't know exactly what this feature is. I only found out after I've already finished animating this, but I only used the radius blur effect in it. And of course, I'm also adding a fade in effect in it using opacity keyframe. A huge factor of keyframing is usually the timing. So when I find the effect that I want or the movement that I want, it usually requires a lot of trial and error when it comes to timing. And that takes me a bit longer to do as compared to me finding the effect that I want. Speaking of effect, we're finally gonna do something that I haven't done yet in a Procreate Dreams process, and that is masking. This one is really powerful because it actually works the same way as you do masking in the Procreate app. So what happens here is that you can actually animate the mask separately from the subject that you are masking. So just like the steam here, as you can see, I'm basically animating the keyframe of the mask and not touching the steam image. Isn't that cool? It's actually one of my favorite features of Procreate Dreams. On this part, I'm mostly just adjusting the keyframes in order to shorten the animation because I realized that it would be too slow for the whole composition that I'm trying to accomplish here. And now just adding the outro animation, which is basically a combination of rotate, scale, and opacity. I've also decided to add a blur effect for the steam coming out of the coffee. We're done with the coffee animation at the moment, and now we're moving on to the tablet and Apple Pencil animation. For this one, I'm actually going to do the same length of time as the cup of coffee since I do plan to make them both pop up at the same time, so their intro and outro animation need to be in sync. Now for one of the most fun features in Procreate Dreams, performance mode. This is basically you recording the movement of the object that you want to animate and it will save it in keyframes. Unfortunately, this just takes a lot more trial and error in my opinion, because it's pretty hard to time the movement. Sometimes I go too fast, sometimes I go too slow, and I'm pretty much just playing around with the timing. It's really fun and quite efficient, but a bit tricky as well. You definitely can't deny though that this is a really friggin' cool feature. Now that I've found the movement that I want the stylus to have, I'm actually playing around with the easing. As you can see, I actually set this up for an easing out, so it does slow down by the time it arrives on the tablet. So when it comes to that, I really advise that you guys play around with it, because the truth is you don't really know what will happen until you see how it affects the animation. We're done with that for the moment, and we're now proceeding to the center shapes. So for this one, I'm focusing more on the flower right now because I want this to continuously rotate throughout the whole loop. So as you can see, I'm making sure that the first and the last frame are in the same angle. And because this actually goes across the four corners, I'm duplicating this and placing it on their respective positions. In terms of the rotation, the flowers on the left side will be rotating clockwise, while the ones on the right will be rotating counterclockwise, so that they're all rotating inwards. And now I'm rotating the full group of shapes in the center using move and scale, and for this one I'm just playing around with the timing as well as the positioning. For this one, instead of the fading in effect that I did of the other two, I want this to come from below and slide in with an easing effect. I'm choosing ease out here so that it slows down at the end of the keyframe. As I plan to rotate this, I checked the anchor point and it wasn't in the center, so now I'm fixing that. Now this part of the process is me playing around with scale and rotation on the individual shapes in the group. So I'm mostly trying out different timings of the keyframes here as soon as they enter the frame. You'll see here that I'm slowly selecting all of them one by one and adding a move and scale keyframe. And after that, just having fun and playing around with each of them. So I expanded the move and scale keyframe so that I can delete the excess rotation keyframe since I only really need 2 of them. This also gives good flexibility so that it doesn't automatically sync with the other keyframes, which can make the animation more dynamic. When it comes to keyframe animation, it's sort of similar with editing videos. There's a lot of playback happening so that you can see how it looks, because that's really the only way to tell if something works or not. Most of the progression you'll notice here is actually on the rotation. I'm pretty good with the scale, but the rotation is tricky for me because I feel like it's going too fast, which is why by the end of this, you'll notice that I lessened the rotation or I slowed it down by moving the keyframe a bit farther. Now we're animating the clouds. For this one, this is actually just 2 layers overlapping one another. Now, what I'm gonna do here is just use the move and scale to just make it move on opposite directions, like the other one is going in while the other one is going out, just to give it a simple loop as the other more dynamic animations happen. I expanded the keyframes here so that I can focus solely on the position X, which is basically just the left or right movement, so that I don't accidentally affect the Y, since it can happen without you noticing. After seeing the result of the move animation, I decided to add some warp. This will at least give me a bit of the cloudy floaty effect, just so that it doesn't look stiff, because as we all know, clouds are not stiff, they're puffy, they're soft. So in a way, this does help give it that additional movement that will make it less, well, stiff. In order to not make the process too repetitive, I'm showing you guys this clouds keyframe because it's the exact same thing I'll be doing on the one on the lower left corner, so I decided not to show that anymore. Now we're going back to the center group because I forgot to animate the part of the layer that has the spinning flowers as well as the sparkles. So on this part, that's what I'm animating. Basically the same thing, which is the rotation and scale combination. As usual, I'm just playing with the timing as well as the rotation. In a way, I actually already have a guide based off of the two shapes that I've already animated, and now just trying to add on top of that an animation to the rest of the elements. Now we're going back to the tablet and coffee group, but this is more of me just positioning them where I want them to appear in the whole composition. This is where I realized that the animation for the pencil isn't far enough because I forgot that I intended to put the tablet on the right outermost part. So yeah, this is me just making a whole new performance mode animation with the pencil. And even though I had to do it again, it's still fun. I haven't really integrated this highlight feature much into my process, but I know that it's definitely gonna help me in the long run so that I can keep track by color code. I'm just finalizing the positions as well as refining the intro and outro animation. Time to move on to the next animation, which is the side elements. And this one, I'm only gonna do the left one because I'm basically mirroring the same animation on the right one. In order to be cohesive with the animation on the center, I'm going to be using the same kind of keyframes, which is the rotate and scale. As I already have a reference for the rotation and scale, I'm basically applying those things but just moving the keyframes in a different time. As these elements will remain throughout the loop, I decided to do the rotation slower because having it move slowly as compared to the one in the middle, which is faster, I feel like it'll avoid having it compete for attention when it comes to the animation. For a little flip effect, I'm using the scale keyframe. Do ignore the X and Y position keyframes because nothing has been changed there. They're all in the same parameters. It just so happens that it does automatically create additional keyframes in those elements even if you don't touch them. Now one more element to animate, which is the pencils, and just applying a bit of scale here for emphasis. Oh, and some rotation. Now I'm just moving the keyframes around and finding the rhythm that I'm looking for, and after that, I'm applying the same timing, the same effect, the same keyframes onto the other side. As I plan the right side to mirror the left side's animation, of course I'm updating the rotation here. So for the right one, it's rotating counterclockwise while the left one is rotating clockwise. And finally, here's the result. Oh, I forgot that I wanted to add a little more something to the back, and that is a duplicate of the center animation, but this time I'm turning it white. And the fastest way to do that is to add a keyframe using filter and going to HSB, which is hue, saturation, and brightness, and of course turn it all the way up to make it white. I wanted to try this effect because it actually reminds me of magical circles in anime, and I want to put a little magic because art is pretty magical. I'm just making final touches to the animation now, especially this new element, as this will loop until the very end. Now, as all artists say, this is the final animation. And that's it for the background process animation. I hope that this helped you in any way in seeing more insight into my own process when making these kinds of things, specifically using Procreate Dreams. I'll see you on my next video, and now let's go out there and make some art.